Welcome to this presentation from the Urban Penguin. My name is Andrew Mallet, and today we're going to look at Red Hat 7 in its beta format and looking at how we can use SELinux to secure our host administration. As always, you can find these videos on theurbanpenguin.com. If you're on Twitter, then follow me at theurbanpenguin, and on Facebook you'll be able to find and like my page again as The Urban Penguin. So we're working at the command line of our Red Hat Enterprise Linux server. We can check its release as always using the cat command and looking at the file etc/Red Hat release. So this is the beta version of Red Hat Enterprise Linux 11. And we're going to look at how we can control access to our administrative commands using SELinux. The first thing that we're going to do is take a look at the ID command, and we can see that we've got the user Bob, and he is in the wheel group. He was made an administrator during the install. The rest of the information is really showing his SELinux context, which shows as being unconfined. So he can pretty much do anything as far as SELinux is concerned, but of course he is going to need the permissions on the files that he uses. So we are just using, if you like, traditional Linux pre-Red Hat 4, where we did not have SELinux. However, just because he belongs to the wheel group doesn't mean any permissions have been applied to the wheel group. If we take a look at using sudo -l, put in Bob's password, it will list what permissions he has listed in the sudoers file, and even though he's in the wheel group, he doesn't have any. However, he is allowed, because he's not restricted by SELinux, to run SUID programs. So if he knows the password of the root user, he can switch to the root user account using the substitute user command. So here su- then takes me through to the root prompt, and of course then as the root user we can look at modifying our sudoers file using sudo, which will make the edits and do the syntax check and allow us to give rights through to the group wheel. So the wheel group is supposed to be the administrators, but you still have to go into the sudoers file and assign rights through. We can see the wheel group is mentioned here in the sudoers file, but the line is commented out, and we really choose whether or not we want the wheel group to be able to run commands with or without a password. We'll ensure that they have to put in their password, so we'll uncomment the top line without the password setting in it, or the no password. As we return back then to Bob's user account, now when we run the command sudo -l, we can see that he is allowed, as suggested in the file, that he can run everything. So yes, now he's an administrator, but first off you're going to have to uncomment the wheel activity within the system. Using sudo -i, if we are able to run all commands, it will actually take you to a root prompt. Again, I'm going to log out of that. We're going to look at how we can start controlling access to these administration commands by using SELinux. As we saw before, just using the ID command, that we were untethered in what we could do, so we were unconfined. We can look at it more granularly, just look at the SELinux context information by using ID -Z. So yes, you can see again we're seeing just the information to do with SELinux on this account. This unconfined status is pretty much the default. Well, it is the default for all accounts. This actually includes the root account. It's only different for the system account. If I run now the sudo -i, so I am now running as root, and again run ID -z, then again we can see that root runs in the system unconfined, which is quite reasonable for root, but maybe not for our users. If we're going to allow SELinux to control it though, it must be enabled. So we can use get enforce, and we can see that we're in the mode of enforcing. It can be disabled or permissive, and permissive will allow activities but won't stop them. We can also see a little bit more information with SE status, and we can see that both the current mode, which is reported by get enforce, is enforcing, but the configuration file, so on a reboot of the machine, it would also be enforcing. So both our current and future settings, the way they're configured at the moment, will be enforced. And of course, if we want SELinux to do the work of security or to help our security for us, of course we need this enabled. We probably want some additional tools though. So if I go through and have a look at things like SE Manage and SE Info, we don't have them installed. So trying to tab complete on here on SE Manage, I don't have it. This is a minimal install on the server, and as the name suggests, it's a minimal install. So we have SELinux but not a lot of the tools. So if I go through and look at yum and what provides, and I want the program SE Manage and SE Info, we'll search our repositories for those commands, and it's returned that SE Manage is in our policy core utils -python, and then we need the SE tools console for the SE Info command. So we'll go straight ahead now and install those two packages, and of course any dependencies will be installed, and we can just cut and paste. A lot better than my typing. If you've seen a few of my videos, you'll know that my typing is not brilliant, but yeah, let's just paste those through. So I'm just using putty to SSH into the machine, and of course yes, we'll say yes, we want them installed. Now if we look at SE Manage to begin with, we can go through and do SE Manage and then look at our Unix or Linux logins, and we'll list those. So we can see the default is unconfined, root is unconfined, and the system one is the only one that is confined, and that's to the system user. So we have Linux users and we have SELinux users, and we map Linux users through to SELinux users. If we look at SE Manage user -- list, we're looking at the SELinux user roles, and we can see that we've got things like guest, we've got then staff user, we've got the user, we've got an ex-guest user. These are all predefined on our system and pretty much control what users are allowed to do if they're assigned or mapped into those user roles. We can also see this information a little bit more tidily, a little bit less information, if we use SE Info. So if I type the command SE Info and then -u, it's going to display me these SELinux user roles. I'm not going to change the default at the moment. We'll look at changing the default user role for our users in a few moments, but we're going to run and create a new user now. So user add -m creates their home directory. We want them to be an administrator, so to be able to use sudo, so we add them into the wheel group, but the -z then sets their user mapping through to the staff user, and we'll create the user account called Joe. Normal deal here, we'll go and set her password, and once that's set, just a simple password, so don't worry about that. Once the password is set, we'll go back into SE Manage and list those user mappings. So login -- list, and we should be able to see now the Joe account is mapped through to the staff user. So completely logging out of the system and going back in as Joe and putting in Joe's password, we should be able to check her context. So if we run then the command id -z, we can see now that yes, she is within the staff user role, and that then sets everything else up. If we try now, and this is a really important thing of doing an SU minus, I am putting the correct password here in, but the staff user is not allowed to use the SU command. They are though allowed to use sudo, so we can see here I can list what I'm allowed to do, and it's saying pretty much again the same as it was before. The wheel group is allowed to do everything. However, when I do a sudo -i, when I look now at getting the root prompt, well, I'm getting permissions denied, and if I look at the ID command, I am root, but I'm still stuck in the confined context of staff. So if we log out again and then clear out of our system and go back in as root, and we'll look at modifying the sudoers file that will assign our users when they sudo into an unconfined role. And with this set, we run the sudo command and go back exactly where we were before, to the wheel group where we've put in our entries. So we're searching here /wheel, and then before the commands, but then after who they're allowed to sudo as, I'm going to put in type equals, and we'll have unconfined underscore type, and we'll set the role similarly, role equals unconfined underscore role. So this is then allowing the user to transition their type and role. They will still be within the staff user. We're not changing that mapping, but we're now allowing sudo to transition. So as we log back in as Joe, everything will stay the same. So I look at ID -z, then again all of this is the same. So she's the staff user. We still are not allowed to run SU. So I'm putting in the correct password, but it's not allowing me in. If I run now the sudo and -i command, put in the password, now as I can transition my context, now when we look at ID -z, even though I'm still the staff user, I'm running unconfined then as root, which is going to give me access then through to a root user prompt if we so desire. So this way we've seen, by having users within the staff group, it prevents them from running SU, and they have to then run those commands that they're permitted through the sudoers file. Whilst we're still at this root prompt, let's go through and start looking at how we can change the default settings. So if I look at SE info and -u to list my users, for our normal users we might choose staff or user as our mappings. The staff can run set UID programs but not SU. The user cannot run set UID programs, which would mean they couldn't change their password. So a lot just depends on what you want. So we're going to set our default mapping, we're going to modify our default mapping so it uses the staff user account. So that will allow users to run the set UID programs, but again, as we've seen, they won't be able to run SU, and they can only run sudo if they're listed in the sudoers file. So we're using -m to modify a login. The -s is then specifying that we're going to set the staff user, so -s for our subject, staff user. And then when we look at the MLS roles, we can go through and say, well, okay, we can use the S0 role, so these are sort of security levels that we can set, and then setting it up for the default user, which is underscore, so double underscore, default double underscore. Once we've set that, hit enter, and then of course we can list these login mappings with semanage login and then -- list, and we can see now that the default is the staff user. So any new user account, unless we specify a different user, will be mapped through to staff view. Hopefully this has been a good introduction to you and you found it useful.